When I pushed open the door to Brier Cup, the chalkboard by the host stand didn't say lunch reservations anymore. It said under new ownership. A woman in a camel coat was taking framed pastry menus off the wall. The old register had been unplugged. The owner, Lucia Velez, stood behind the counter holding a legal pad and blinking like the room had changed shape too fast for her to trust it. And next to the pastry case, one hand resting on a brass ring of keys, stood my CEO. Maren Locke looked exactly as she always did at work, dark hair pinned up, pearl gray suit, expression so cool it could have frozen steam. The only thing out of place was the setting. Maren belonged in boardrooms, hotels, and the sort of meetings where people said words like expansion corridor while pretending they meant something human. She did not belong inside the neighborhood cafe where I was supposed to meet a blind date arranged by my aunt. She saw me immediately. "Jonah," she said. I stopped halfway to the counter. "Why are you here?" "I bought the cafe." I laughed because it was too absurd not to. "No, you didn't." Lucia gave me an apologetic little shrug. "She did, honey." I stared at Maren. "The whole cafe?" "Yes." "Today?" "This morning." "Why?" Her eyes moved to the small folded card still sitting on the host stand. It had my name written across the front in blue marker. Jonah Bishop, 12:30. Maren reached over, flipped it around, and wrote on the back with the silver fountain pen she carried everywhere. Then she set it down again so I could read it. "You're mine." My mouth actually fell open. "Maren." "Yes?" "You cannot buy a cafe because I had lunch plans." Her expression didn't shift. "I clearly can." The front door opened behind me. A woman in a red wool coat stepped inside, glanced at the reservation card, then at me, then at Maren. She had warm brown eyes and the polite, hopeful expression of someone entering a blind date against her better judgment. My aunt had texted me a photograph of her that morning. "Erica." "Wonderful." Erica looked from the sign on the host stand to Maren's handwriting and then directly at me. "Am I early, or did I walk into a hostage situation?" I closed my eyes for 1 second. "It's not a hostage situation," Maren said. "That remains to be seen." Erica gave a short laugh, then realized neither of us was joking. "Right. Okay. I'm going to ask one question, and I'd love an honest answer. Are you unavailable or just professionally endangered?" "Possibly both," I said. That seemed to settle it for her. She held up both hands. "I like a man with mystery, but not this much mystery. Good luck." She turned and left before I could explain anything worth hearing. I looked back at Maren. "You scared off my date." "She left on her own." "You bought her lunch location before she arrived." "Because she was your date." That sentence is still insane. Lucia cleared her throat softly. "Do you two want the back office? I have 3 baristas pretending not to stare, and they're all failing." Maren nodded as if she had been offered a conference room. I walked into the back office because if I stayed in public 1 second longer, I was going to say something loud enough to get posted online by dinner. The office was barely bigger than a pantry. A desk, 2 metal chairs, filing shelves, 1 old fan in the corner. Maren shut the door behind us. Then I turned on her. "What is wrong with you?" Her eyes narrowed a fraction. "That's a broad question." "You bought a cafe." "Yes." "To stop a blind date." "Yes." "You signed a message claiming me like a medieval land dispute." It was concise. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Concise is not the word. Maren set the brass ring of keys on Lucia's desk and folded her arms. "You told Eli from procurement yesterday that your aunt had arranged a blind date." So I asked where. I stared at her. "You asked where?" "Yes." "And then you bought the cafe." "Yes." This was not helping my blood pressure. "Maren, I do not work in one of your buildings. I am not a chair you can move into a better room." Something flickered across her face at that, but she answered steadily. "No. You are a man about to have lunch with a stranger when you have spent 8 months pretending not to know I want you." The words landed harder than I wanted them to. I stepped back a pace. There were a lot of things I could have said to that. Most of them were true. None of them solved the problem at hand. "You don't get to do this," I said finally. "Not because you're my CEO." Maren's expression cooled even further. "I did not buy Brier Cup as your CEO." "How exactly did you buy it?" "Personally." "Wonderful. That really clears up the ethical nightmare." A phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the caller ID and answered immediately. "Dana?" The woman on the other end didn't waste time. "Mr. Bishop, this is Dana Reese from Family Services. We're still scheduled for your home visit tomorrow at 4, but before then I need to ask about a video currently circulating online." Everything inside me went still. What video? She paused. The one in which your employer appears to announce that you belong to her. I turned slowly toward Marin. Dana continued, calm and professional and suddenly terrifying. Because your guardianship petition is active, I need clarity about the stability of your household and any relationship that might materially affect it. My grip tightened around the phone. Ms. Reese, I can explain. I'm sure you can. I'll need a full explanation tomorrow. The line clicked dead. For a second, I just stood there. Marin's voice, when it came, was lower than before. What was that? I looked at her. That, I said, was the caseworker assigned to my petition to become my sister's legal guardian. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Marin didn't do dramatic in the ordinary way. Her control just thin enough for real alarm to show through. You have a hearing next week, she said. Yes. And she saw you buying my lunch date, declaring ownership over me in a cafe. She took one step closer. Jonah. No. The word came out harder than I intended, but I didn't take it back. If you care about me at all, I said, you are done interfering right now. My apartment smelled like tomato soup and solder when I got home that night. Tess was at the kitchen table with one sock on, a screwdriver clenched between her teeth, and the half-built shell of a robotics project spread across my placemats. She was 15, all elbows and dark braids in concentration, with the kind of intelligent stare that made adults feel unprepared if they came at her with weak logic. She glanced up as I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door. You look like somebody keyed your soul. Good evening to you too. She pulled the screwdriver from her mouth. Did the blind date kill you, or did you kill the blind date? Neither. That got her attention. Tess sat up straighter. What happened? I set my bag down and leaned both hands on the counter. Marin bought the cafe before I got there. She blinked. The whole cafe? Yes. Like, with money? Yes, Tess. That's generally how people buy property. A slow grin spread across her face. Oh, that is psychotic. It is. She really likes you. That is not the point. She gave me a look that said it was absolutely one of the points. Then the grin faded a little. She made the internet? Yes. Dana called? Yes. Tessa's shoulders dropped. That was the real problem in our apartment. Not gossip. Not a wrecked lunch. Not even the fact that my CEO had publicly acted like a possessive lunatic with perfect tailoring. 6 months earlier, our mother had entered long-term rehab after her third collapse in a year. Our father had been gone long enough that Tess referred to him like a natural disaster that moved out of state. I had moved her in with me temporarily, then for longer than temporarily, then permanently in every meaningful way. The court petition was just catching up with what had already become our life. We needed the hearing next week to go cleanly. Stable home. Stable routine. Stable adult. And now there was a video online of the CEO of my company claiming me over a cappuccino machine. Tess twisted the screwdriver in her fingers. Do you think this can actually mess it up? I don't know. That was the part one hated most. I had built our life carefully. School pickup plan. Therapy schedule. Emergency contacts. Grocery list on the fridge. Friday takeout. Her robotics club on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every drawer in her room actually belonged to her now, not to a guest version of her. I could account for almost every moving part in our week. What I could not account for was Marin Locke deciding my lunch hour needed a hostile takeover. Tess slid out of her chair and came around the table. Okay, she said. Then tomorrow you tell Dana the truth. The truth is not flattering. The truth is you've never let anybody unstable within 10 feet of me. I looked at her. She crossed her arms. You don't let me use knives when I'm wearing fuzzy socks. That's because you nearly lost a thumb making quesadillas. That was one time. Twice. Her mouth twitched. Then she leaned against the counter and asked, Are you in love with her? It was the question I had spent most of the evening refusing to ask myself in plain English. Marin had been my CEO for just under a year. Before that she'd been an abstract name attached to a portfolio of hotels, neighborhood cafes, and corporate dining contracts across Maryland and D.C. Then the founder retired, Marin took control of Harrow Hospitality, and suddenly she was everywhere. Walking kitchens at 6 in the morning. Rewriting broken supplier agreements herself. Rearranging banquet floor plans with the precision of a field commander. Eating exactly half a blood orange at lunch and never the whole thing. At some point, without my permission, I had begun noticing things about her that had nothing to do with work. The silver pen. The way she counted under her breath when she was angry. The old brass keys she kept on her keyring from the first property she had ever bought. How she never sat with her back to a door. How carefully she listened when Tess talked, the one time our schedules had overlapped at a community fundraiser. "All right," Tess said when I didn't answer immediately. "That bad, huh? I don't know what I am." "Interesting. Not helpful." She tipped her head. "Can she make your hearing worse?" "Yes." "Can she make it better?" I thought of Marin's face when I told her about Dana Reese. Not guilt exactly. Guilt would have been easier. It had looked like panic she was trying to process into something useful. "She's going to want to," I said. Tess nodded. "Then tell her no." I smiled despite myself. That was also my plan. The next morning, Dana Reese arrived exactly on time in a navy blazer and practical shoes, carrying a leather folder and the kind of gentle expression professionals develop when they've seen every possible version of family and learn not to show surprise too early. She spoke to Tess first, then to me. She walked through the apartment, asked sensible questions about school pickup, emergency care, finances, and how often our mother was in contact. She checked the smoke alarms. She looked at the extra shelves I'd installed in Tessa's room and asked whether those had been there before. "No," Tess said. "Jonah put them in because I kept stacking books on the floor." Dana wrote that down. At the end of the visit, she closed the folder and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Now tell me about the video." So I did. I did not soften it. I did not turn Marin into a joke or a harmless eccentric or a quirky inconvenience in excellent fabric. I told Dana the truth. My CEO bought the cafe where I had planned to meet a blind date, publicly claimed me, and created a situation I had immediately objected to. Dana listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked the question I had expected. "Are you involved with Ms. Locke?" "No." That answer was true and painful in about equal proportion. "Does she have authority over your schedule, compensation, or continued employment?" "Yes." "Do you believe she might use that authority in a personal way?" I thought about the cafe. About the keys. About the fact that Marin's first instinct whenever a room went wrong was to own more of it. "Yes," I said. Dana wrote something down. Then she said, "Before I finalize my report, I will need documentation showing that your supervisory relationship can be separated from your personal life if necessary." My stomach tightened. "She can do that." Dana's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Bishop, I want to be clear. I did not ask what Ms. Locke can do. I asked whether your life can remain stable without depending on her choices." There it was. The line that mattered. Not whether Marin loved me. Not whether she regretted yesterday. Whether she could step back far enough for my life to stay mine. After Dana left, I sent Marin a message. "We need to talk." Not at the office. Not at Brier Cup. 6 o'clock. Patterson Park Conservatory. Her reply came less than 10 seconds later. "I'll be there." Marin was already waiting outside the conservatory when I got there. She stood near the glass doors with both hands in her coat pockets, dark green wool this time, no assistants, no driver, no visible armor except posture. The late afternoon light turned the glass behind her gold. "You're late by 2 minutes," she said. "Good evening." It is not a criticism. It is an observation. That sounds like one of your criticisms wearing a fake mustache. A faint breath of something almost amused passed over her face and disappeared again. I stopped in front of her. "Dana did the home visit." "How bad?" "She needs proof that my life is not professionally entangled with yours." Marin's jaw tightened. "That's fair." That answer threw me off balance more than denial would have. "Fair?" "Yes." "You don't want to argue?" "No." That got my full attention. "What changed?" She looked at the conservatory roof for a second before answering. "I spent last night reviewing every line of authority between your role and mine. It's worse than I realized." "Meaning?" "You report through 2 operational layers, but I still sign off on compensation bands and final performance reviews for managers at your level." That's what I told Dana. Marin nodded once. "By tomorrow morning, you won't." I stared at her. "What?" "I'm transferring direct executive oversight of your role to Omar Lindell." "Omar's the COO." "Yes." "You can just do that?" "Yes." "No." Her eyes narrowed. "No? You do not get to hear that my guardianship case is at risk and immediately rearrange the company to rescue me." Marin held my gaze. "I'm not rescuing you. I'm removing a conflict I created. That still affects the case. It affects the truth." There was a difference, and we both knew it. I blew out a breath and looked away toward the winterbear trees. Marin stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough that I could hear the slight catch in her breathing. "I am not going to call Dana Reese," she said. "I am not going to send lawyers, recommendations, references, or a memo about your character. I am not going to ask the court for anything, but I will not remain in a position where your salary, hours, and future depend on whether I can control myself in a cafe. The sentence was so clear and so unlike the version of power I had been expecting that I had to reset. That's not all, is it? I asked. No. What else? She looked down briefly, then back at me. I'm removing myself from the acquisition committee until the Brier Cup purchase is reviewed independently. That mattered to her. I knew enough about Harrow hospitality to know the acquisition committee was where Marin actually had fun. She loved rooms, menus, locations, what people needed from a place, and what money could preserve if somebody with enough of it moved fast enough. You're stepping off the committee because of me. I'm stepping off because the board is right to question whether I exercise judgment. That sentence cost her something. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was Tess. I picked up immediately. What happened? Nothing bad, she said. Calm down. Are you with Marin? I looked at Marin. Yes. Great. Then ask her why she owns my robotics club now. I frowned. What? The upstairs room at Brier Cup. Lucia called. The new owner told her the Thursday Latchkey Lab stays. I turned slowly toward Marin. Latchkey Lab? She said, very evenly, your sister builds ugly little robots in the upstairs meeting room above the cafe. From the phone, Tess yelled, they're not ugly. Marin took the phone gently from my hand before I could object. They are structurally sincere, she told Tess. Tess laughed on the other end. I watched the exchange in disbelief. Marin handed the phone back. Tess told me to bring home noodles and hung up before I could ask anything useful. Then I looked at Marin again. There's an upstairs room? Yes. You knew Tess met there? Yes. You bought the cafe and didn't think to mention that? You were occupied. That is an offensive understatement. For the first time since the cafe disaster, Marin looked mildly self-conscious. Lucia was trying to sell, she said. I knew about the room before I knew about your blind date. That changed the shape of things immediately. Not enough to erase the damage. Enough to complicate it. How long have you been talking to Lucia? Marin hesitated. That alone told me the answer was going to irritate me. How long? 3 weeks. I stared at her. 3 weeks meant before the blind date. Before my aunt. Before the reservation card. 3 weeks meant Brier Cup hadn't been purely a wild act of possessive insanity. There had been another thread in it, something tied to Lucia and the cafe and somehow to Tess. You're explaining, I said slowly, right now. Yes. Good. Start with why my little sister's robotics club ended up in your real estate decisions. Marin glanced toward the doors of the conservatory. Not here. Why not? Because if I tell you this standing outside in the cold, you'll accuse me of staging a confession poorly. I almost laughed. Almost. Inside the conservatory cafe, we sat at a tiny iron table near a wall of ferns. Marin wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she never drank from and looked, for once, like she was organizing herself from the inside instead of the room around her. Lucia approached Harrow Hospitality about Brier Cup last month, she said. She wanted to retire, but she didn't want the place sold to a chain or stripped into a cocktail bar. That sounds like Lucia. I visited. And I found your sister upstairs teaching a 12-year-old why he had soldered his wheels backward. That pulled a laugh out of me before I could stop it. Marin's expression softened for a second. Lucia explained what the room was, she said. After-school tutoring, robotics, homework help, neighborhood kids until their parents got off shift. She asked whether Harrow would keep it. And you said yes. Yes. You were already buying the cafe. I was considering it. That distinction sounded extremely Marin. Then she reached into her coat pocket and laid an old brass key on the table between us. It was worn smooth at the edges, older than the rest of the keys on her ring. My mother managed a luncheonette in Easton when I was a child, she said. I used to do homework in the back booth while she closed. When the owner sold the place, she got 3 weeks' notice and no severance. I watched men in suits take inventory while my mother packed sugar jars into a box she had brought from home. I looked at the key. What is that? The side door key. You kept it? She gave it to me the last day. The tea between us gave off a curl of steam. I buy places quickly, Marin said, because I hate the moment between somebody else's decision and the damage it does. Now I understood the keyring. The way she held spaces like they might disappear if she didn't close her hand hard enough. Why cafes, dining rooms, hotel lobbies, and neighborhood properties mattered to her in ways that went beyond profit. And when you heard about my blind date, I said, you made the wrong room about the wrong fear. She met my eyes without blinking. Yes. The thing about understanding someone is that it doesn't automatically make them easier to forgive. Marin had a reason. She still made a mess. We spent the next 3 days walking around both truths at once. At work, the transition happened exactly as she promised. Omar Lindell called me into his office Wednesday morning, closed the door, and said, "Before you panic, this is not disciplinary. Marin has formally recused herself from all employment decisions involving you. You report to me for the foreseeable future." He said it like a man reading a fire code amendment, but his eyes were curious in a way he probably thought he was hiding. I signed the transfer acknowledgement. By lunchtime, half the company knew. By 3, the other half was pretending not to. Marin kept her distance. No private meetings. No drop-by-accident conversations. Her assistant sent schedule updates through Omar. I saw her once across the atrium speaking to 2 board members with the flat, dangerous calm that meant somebody in the room had overestimated their right to explain things to her. That should have eased the pressure on my week. It didn't, because the less she interfered, the more visible her restraint became. And because Tess liked her. That part arrived in the form of a text Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing banquet staffing. Lucia says Marin bought new soldering stations for upstairs. Chill. She labeled them with numbers so nobody steals tips. I texted back. She is not your eccentric benefactor. Tess replied. No, she's your scary boss who smiles exactly twice a year. The stations are good though. That evening I stopped by Brier Cup on my way home. Lucia was behind the counter training a teenage barista on milk textures. The front room looked the same except for 2 things. The register system had been upgraded, and a small brass sign on the counter now read community room upstairs, Thursdays reserved. Lucia saw me and handed me a coffee I hadn't ordered. She told me you'd come in eventually. Did she? She also told me not to say anything that sounded like a defense. That sounds like her. Lucia smiled and leaned her elbows on the counter. She's terrible at soft landings, Mijo. But she kept her word. About the upstairs room. About the staff too. Nobody loses hours. Nobody loses the room. And she won't turn this place into one of those soulless hotel cafes where the muffins look like they've signed waivers. I took a sip of coffee because arguing with Lucia while holding something warm had always been impossible. Why Harrow? I asked. You had other buyers. I did. Why her? Lucia glanced toward the stairs. Because she asked what the place meant before she asked what it earned. That felt unfairly persuasive. Lucia continued, and because when I said the upstairs room mattered, she didn't call it a sentimental liability. I looked around the cafe. Lunch traffic had thinned. Rain tapped softly against the front windows. 2 high school kids shared fries near the wall outlet under the chalkboard menu. This place wasn't only about my blind date, I said. Lucia laughed. Honey, no. That part was just her losing her mind artistically. I had to laugh too. Then the front door opened. Marin stepped in, stopped when she saw me, and visibly reconsidered the entire concept of entering. She was carrying a flat cardboard pastry box and wearing the same dark coat from the conservatory. Her gaze moved from me to Lucia. Lucia, traitor that she was, smiled and said, Good. You're both here. I'm going upstairs. Don't destroy my counter. Then she left us alone. Marin set the pastry box down. These are from St. Agnes Bakery. Tess said the lemon bars here are better, but those are sold out by this hour. It took me a second to catch up. You brought dessert for my sister? Yes. She didn't ask you to. No. She told me your home hearing went badly and that this might improve your mood. She has very little respect for process. That sounded exactly like Tess. I slid into the booth by the window because standing was making me too aware of the rest of the room. After one careful beat, Marin sat across from me. We need one clean rule, I said. All right. No more surprise purchases based on me. That feels extremely narrow and strangely cruel. Marin. Fine. No buying places to fix what you're afraid of. Her fingers rested on the edge of the pastry box. She did not look away. That's larger, she said quietly. Yes. She accepted the hit. Then, after a pause, she said, My board wants me to sell Brier Cup. That startled me. What? It was a personal purchase reviewed under our reputational conduct clause. 2 members think the cleanest response is to dispose of the property before the next quarter. And what do you think? Marin's mouth hardened. I think the cleanest response is often indistinguishable from cowardice. I almost smiled. That also sounds like you. It should. She looked around the room. I am not selling it this way, she said. Not unless I can preserve the upstairs program and the staff. I believed her. That was part of the problem too. Believing Marin almost always led somewhere complicated. My hearing is Tuesday, I said. Until then, I need distance. That landed harder than anything else I had said. I know. No dinners. I know. No private visits. Yes. And if Dana wants to speak to you, you tell the truth. Marin nodded. I will. I pushed the pastry box back toward her. For Tess. She looked at it, then at me. That's not a dismissal? No. She stood, then paused. Jonah. Yeah? When you said at the conservatory that I made the wrong room about the wrong fear, you were right. I waited. She took a breath that looked like work. I'm not afraid of blind dates, she said. I'm afraid of arriving too late. That sentence stayed with me long after she walked out carrying nothing but the brass keyring and all the parts of herself she was finally letting me see. Dana Reese requested to speak with Marin on Friday. She made that clear in a short email copied only to me. Because Ms. Locke's conduct has already entered the record, I'll need a direct statement regarding her role in your employment, housing, and daily family stability. I forwarded it to Omar, not to Marin. He replied in 4 minutes, already scheduled. Off-site. No company counsel. Her request, not mine. That told me more about Marin's state of mind than any speech would have. The interview happened Monday afternoon at a neutral office near the courthouse. Dana would not let me sit in. When Marin came out 43 minutes later, I was waiting across the street with my hands in my coat pockets and my nerves stretched thin enough to hear. She crossed to me without hesitation. How bad? I asked. She was competent and unimpressed. That sounds like Dana. Marin nodded. I told her the truth. Which truth? All of it. She didn't make me drag it out of her, which I appreciated. I told her I purchased Brier Cup before your arrival because I was jealous and angry and convinced I could solve a private feeling by controlling a public room. I told her that was a misuse of judgment. I told her I no longer supervise your work, have no involvement in your pay or schedule, and have no financial role in your household. The wind lifted a strand of hair loose from her clip. She didn't notice. I also told her you are the most reliable person I know, she said. Then I stopped talking because she had not asked for my poetry. That almost got a smile out of me. Almost. She didn't ask whether we're together? She did. And? Marin looked directly at me. I said no. That hurt. It needed to. She asked whether I wanted that to change, Marin added. I kept still. I said yes. That one landed differently. Not as rescue. Not as a claim. Just fact, put in the room where truth belonged. What did Dana say? I asked. That my feelings were less relevant than my restraint. I laughed softly despite myself. She likes the knife clean. Yes. Marin shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Jonah, there's something else. Of course there was. My board met this morning, she said. They voted to require a formal disposition plan for Brier Cup by Wednesday. My attention sharpened. Meaning sell it. Or transfer it. To whom? I haven't decided. There it was. Not the purchase. The decision afterward. If Marin sold Brier Cup to the wrong buyer, Latchkey Lab died, Lucia's staff scattered, and the one-space test treated like a second safe address would disappear. If Marin kept it under Harrow, it remained part of the same tangled story Dana had just spent a week examining. And what do you want? I asked. Marin looked almost offended by the question. You know what I want. I do. I'm asking whether you know. That stopped her. We stood on the sidewalk while traffic moved past and the courthouse flag snapped in the wind. Finally she said, I want a version of this that isn't ownership. That was the closest she had ever come to naming the real change aloud. I nodded once. Good. It may cost me. Also good. A strange expression crossed her face. You're a difficult man to pursue. I'm aware. She hesitated. Then, because apparently the universe enjoyed testing my blood pressure, she said, Tess called me yesterday. I stared at her. Why? She wanted to know whether I understood the difference between helping and hovering. I laughed outright this time. Marin looked mildly annoyed. She's young to be that exact. She learned from me. Tragic. We started walking without discussing it. North toward the garage where my car was parked, though neither of us said goodbye immediately. At the corner, Marin stopped. I know you asked for distance until Tuesday, she said. I'm keeping that. Okay. But if the board strips Brier Cup before then, I'll have made the wrong kind of silence. I studied her face. This was the actual test of whether she had understood anything. Not the cafe. Not the caseworker. not the public declaration. Whether she could act on the space she controlled without turning that action into a hidden answer for me. Do what you can live with before you know my result, I said. Her eyes held mine. That's fair. Then do that. Tuesday morning was the hearing. Tess wore a navy dress she hated and boots she claimed made her look like a person who did taxes. She was pale but steady. I wore my best charcoal suit and a tie my mother said made me look trustworthy in a way that causes paperwork to behave. Marin did not come to court. I had not asked her to, and she had not inserted herself into the edges of the day. That mattered. What I didn't know, walking into the family court building with Tess beside me, was what she was doing instead. Family court is built for no one's comfort. Too much beige. Too many chairs with no forgiveness in them. Hallways full of people pretending they aren't listening to each other's disasters. Tess and I sat on a wooden bench outside Department 3 while our attorney reviewed the order of questions for what felt like the 10th time. Dana Reese was already inside with her report. Our mother had sent a written statement from treatment. Our father had not appeared, which in this case counted as useful consistency. Tess leaned against me just enough that no one else would notice. If I throw up, she whispered, you have to lie and say it was emotionally meaningful. You are not throwing up. If I do, then yes. I'll make it sound noble. That made her breathe a little easier. The hearing itself lasted 40 minutes. Dana testified first. Stable home. Appropriate routines. Strong sibling bond. Clear school support. No concerns about safety. She referenced the viral video in one clipped paragraph and stated that after additional inquiry, she had found no evidence that my employer exercised control over Tessa's housing, care, or legal status. Then the judge asked me questions. Work schedule. Emergency backup plan. Therapy attendance. Why I wanted guardianship instead of waiting until Tess turned 18 and timing solved the paperwork for us. I answered honestly. Because she shouldn't have to spend the next 3 years living in a legal loophole. Tess testified too. Briefly. Clearly. With more calm than I felt. When the judge asked where she wanted to live, she answered, with Jonah. That's already home. We're just catching the forms up. My attorney's eyes closed for half a second in relief. At 11:17, the judge granted the petition. Not temporary. Full legal guardianship until adulthood unless modified by the court. Tess grabbed my hand so hard my knuckles clicked. I didn't care. By the time we reached the hallway, my mother was crying on speakerphone, Tess was laughing and crying at the same time, and my own body felt like it had forgotten how to hold tension now that it didn't need to. Then Lucia Velez texted me. Come to the cafe when you're done. Bring Tess. Don't argue. Tess saw the message over my shoulder. Is Marin there? I don't know. She's there. You don't know that. She's dramatically there. That turned out to be correct. Brier Cup was closed when we arrived, though it was only lunchtime. The front door was unlocked. Inside, Lucia stood behind the counter with 3 baristas, a stack of papers, and the expression of a woman trying not to ruin a good mascara day. Marin was near the pastry case in a black coat, one hand resting on the counter edge. Omar Lindell stood by the espresso machine looking like he had been dragged here on purpose. Tess went straight to Lucia because there were still lemon bars in the world and she had earned one. I walked toward Marin. What happened? She looked at me, then at Tess, then back at me. How did court go? The fact that she asked that first told me almost everything. We got it, I said. Full guardianship. Something like light moved through her face, quick and clean and impossible to mistake. Good, she said. Then Lucia slapped the stack of papers on the counter. Tell him what you did before I pass out from suspense. Marin exhaled softly. This morning, she said, I transferred Brier Cup's operating ownership to a worker and community cooperative. I stared at her. Lucia pointed at herself and the baristas. Us. With a governance board for the upstairs program. My eyes went back to Marin. You transferred it? Yes. At cost? No. That surprised me. What do you mean no? I transferred it below cost. Harrow wrote off the difference as a community stabilization initiative. Omar gave me a dry look from across the room. The board hated that sentence. I looked at Marin again. You did this today? Yes. Before the hearing? Yes. Why? She held my gaze steadily. Because if I waited to see what you got, the cafe would still be my leverage. The room seemed to sharpen around that sentence. Marin continued, her voice even and quiet. Tess should not have to wonder whether the place she goes after school exists because I want her brother grateful. Lucia should not have to keep answering to the woman who hijacked your lunch. And you should never have to ask whether loving me comes with a building attached. Lucia wiped one eye with the heel of her palm. Damn her for making me emotional in my own cafe. Omar muttered. She also resigned her vote on the East Corridor restaurant acquisition to get the board to approve the transfer. Since we're listing expensive decisions. I turned sharply. What? Marin's jaw tightened very slightly. That's not relevant. It sounds relevant. It's not the important part. But it was. I knew enough about Harrow to understand what East Corridor meant. 3 new rail station cafe properties. A year of growth planning. The kind of portfolio Marin would normally guard with her teeth. You gave up your acquisition vote, I said. Temporarily. For the board? For the transfer. Because they blamed Brier Cup. Yes. I stood there looking at her, while behind us Tess laughed at something Lucia said and the coffee grinder hummed once in the back. This was not the same as buying the cafe. Buying it had been control. This was cost. Not for my result, she had acted before she knew it. Not to secure a yes for me, she had no guarantee of that either. Just because she had finally understood that if she wanted me, she had to stop buying the rooms around me and start leaving some of them open. Tess wandered over with a plate and a lemon bar the size of a legal argument. So, she said cheerfully, are you two going to keep staring at each other like emotionally constipated gargoyles, or can I eat in peace? Lucia made a choking sound behind the counter. Marin, to her credit, did not even flinch. I almost laughed. Then I looked at Tess and said, give me 5 minutes. She narrowed her eyes. Only if no one cries dramatically on the pastries. No promises, Lucia said. That got everybody laughing except Marin, who was still watching me with that terrifying concentration of hers, as if the next sentence could change her whole day and she had decided not to blink until it arrived. I stepped closer. You did this without knowing what happened in court. Yes. You let the cafe go. Yes. You let the vote go. Marin's mouth set. I let control go where it didn't belong. That was the sentence. The one I needed. Not because it fixed the cafe. Not because it repaired the hearing or cleaned up the video or made her less dangerous to want. Because it proved she had learned the difference between holding me and holding on. We did not kiss in front of Lucia's pastry case. Partly because Tess was there and would have made noises I didn't want to hear in public. Partly because if I touched Marin too early, everything else in the room would have disappeared behind it. So instead I said, walk with me. She glanced at Lucia, who waved us both toward the side door with the authority of a woman who had sold one business and apparently acquired the right to manage everyone's emotional timing. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The alley behind Brier Cup smelled like damp brick and coffee grounds. Delivery crates were stacked by the back gate. Somewhere above us, the Latchkey Lab kids were probably soldering something crooked and brilliant. Marin came to stand beside me, close enough to matter. You said in the conservatory that you were afraid of arriving too late, I said. Yes. You did. A corner of her mouth moved. That was not intended as a compliment. It wasn't one. We stood in the quiet for a second. Then I went on. The court gave me guardianship because Tess has a stable home, because she was heard, because Dana did her job, and because I kept showing up. Not because you saved me. I know. That matters. Yes. And what you did today matters too. She looked at the wet pavement instead of at me. I couldn't keep owning the room, she said. Not if I wanted anything real from you. I reached out and touched the sleeve of her coat. That got her attention immediately. You still want something real? I asked. Marin looked straight at me. Yes. No hesitation. No performance. No hedging behind timing or power or technicalities. Good, I said. Her expression changed by the slightest degree, enough for me to see how tightly she had been holding herself still. Then I added, because I'm finally ready to admit I do too. That landed harder than anything else so far. I could see it in the way she breathed in and did not immediately breathe out. Jonah. Yeah? If you make this a joke now, I will buy your building out of spite. I laughed. We discussed that impulse. We have. I'm serious. Her face softened. So I gave her the version that was actually true. I don't want the cafe purchase, I said. I don't want the public claim. I don't want to be managed into somebody's idea of fate. She nodded once. I want the woman who gave up the keys before she knew whether she'd get anything back. Marin stood perfectly still. Then she said, very quietly, that woman would like to take you to lunch. I smiled. Today? Yes. At this cafe? Yes. You no longer own it. I'm aware. That has to bother you a little. It bothers me exactly the correct amount. The answer was so absurdly Marin that I took another step closer and touched her face. She went silent. Not cold. Not distant. Just quiet in the way people get when something they wanted for a long time finally becomes possible and they don't want to move too fast through it. I'll go to lunch with you, I said. But I'm choosing the table. Good. And you don't get to call me yours in public unless I'm standing there wanting to hear it. Her eyes held mine. Good, she said again, but this time it sounded different. Like agreement, not control. Then I kissed her. Marin had kissed me once before, months ago, on the cheek, after a brutal banquet rescue at midnight when a client tipped over her own champagne tower and I somehow talked the room back into believing elegance had occurred. It had lasted less than a second and given me 3 months of private trouble. This was nothing like that. This time she reached for me without hesitation, one hand closing at the back of my coat, the other settling against my jaw with a steadiness that felt chosen rather than seized. There was hunger in it, yes, because Marin did not do anything halfway once she let herself want it. But there was also a tension, the kind that asks instead of takes. When we broke apart, she kept her forehead briefly against mine. I have wanted to do that without a lawsuit nearby, she said. I laughed softly. That can be arranged. The back door opened. Tessa's voice rang out behind us. If you two are done having your rain-soaked independent film moment, Lucia says the lunch rush starts in 10. Marin straightened, and for the first time since I'd known her, she actually looked embarrassed. I enjoyed it immensely. We went back inside together. Lucia had already set a small table near the front window with 2 menus, 2 water glasses, and a folded reservation card in the middle. I recognized the cardstock immediately. It was the same kind Brier Cup had used for the blind date bookings. Marin saw it too. Her gaze dropped to the card, then to me. On the front, in Lucia's looping marker handwriting, were the words, 12:45, not blind. Tess snorted into her lemon bar. Marin reached for the card, turned it over, and stopped. Something had already been written on the back. I took it from her and read it. In Lucia's handwriting, under a tiny doodled heart, it said, "No one owns the table. Order what you mean." I looked up at Marin. For the first time that day, all the hard lines in her face gave way at once. Not because someone had made a joke. Because the room had finally stopped being a trap. Lucia retreated to the counter with the satisfied air of a woman who had decided real life was finally entertaining enough again. Tess carried her lemon bar upstairs to Latchkey Lab and announced she would graciously give the adults privacy unless they embarrassed her. That left Marin and me at the window table with the folded card between us and the late lunch light turning the glass gold. For a moment neither of us touched the menus. Then Marin said, "I dislike that Lucia is wise. She's unbearable that way." Yes. We looked at the card again. No one owns the table. Order what you mean. Marin reached for the silver pin in her coat pocket, then stopped and looked at me. The pause itself mattered. "May I?" she asked. I smiled. "That's new." "Yes. And nice." She waited. I nodded once. Marin turned the card over to the blank side and wrote in her narrow, controlled hand. Then she slid it across the table to me. I read the line once and had to read it again because my chest had tightened too fast. "I want lunch with you tomorrow, and next week, and when the room is ordinary. No ownership. No public claim. No verbal trap dressed up as confidence. Just a woman who had spent half our story buying the room and had finally learned to ask for a seat in it." I looked up. Marin was watching me with that same impossible stillness she had in difficult negotiations, except now I knew what sat underneath it. Not arrogance. Not certainty. Risk. I took the pen from her hand. Then, under her sentence, I wrote, "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere you can't meet me on purpose." When I pushed the card back, she read it slowly. Her expression changed, softened, steadied, deepened all at once. Then she put the card down very carefully beside the salt shaker, like it had become something breakable. "What are you smiling at?" I asked. "You said good. That's what happens when I mean yes. I enjoy it." I noticed. Lucia arrived to take the order. Marin looked at the menu, then set it aside without opening it. "I'll have the lemon chicken soup," she said, "and the grilled cheese with the tomato jam." Lucia blinked. "That's not what you always get." "I know." I looked at her. Brier Cup had a menu Marin knew perfectly. She had probably memorized it the day she first came to talk to Lucia. If she had ordered for control, she would have chosen the exact lunch she could predict. Instead, she had ordered the lunch Tess loved. The one she had never once selected for herself because it was messy and warm and impossible to eat elegantly. Lucia looked at me, hiding a smile. And you? I picked up the card one more time, then set it back down between us. I'll have the same. Lucia nodded and moved away. Across the table, Marin's fingers rested near mine. Not touching yet. Waiting. I closed the distance first. Her hand turned over under mine immediately, palm warm, grip firm and deliberate. Outside, people passed the cafe windows without any idea what had begun and ended inside these rooms. Upstairs, I could hear a burst of laughter from Latchkey Lab. At the counter, Lucia was scolding a barista for stacking plates like a person trying to lose an argument with gravity. Brier Cup no longer belonged to Marin. That was exactly why lunch with her finally could. She looked at our joined hands, then at the card, then back at me. Jonah. Yeah? My first message was terrible. The one that said you're mine? Yes. I thought about the chalkboard, the keys, the awful timing, the hearing, the co-op papers, the brass key on the conservatory table, the way she had finally put down the parts of the room that were never hers to hold. Then I squeezed her hand once. It was, I said. But if you want to try again, I'm here. Marin's eyes held mine. She didn't reach for the pen this time. She didn't need it. Good, she said quietly. Because this time I'd rather earn it. That's all for today. Remember to subscribe and support us.